There you have Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the Deputy Press Secretary for the White House, ending today's rather contentious daily White House press briefing. Hey guys, I'm Amna Nawaz, live in New York. Stay with us here because there was a lot of information there. We're going to unpack it for you right now in a briefing breakdown. With me, as always, down in our Washington, D.C. bureau, ABC's political director, Rick Klein. How you doing today, Rick?
My head is spinning a little bit, Amna, unpacking the last couple days, but doing well other than that.
You're not alone. Hang with me. We're going to go through it together. Catherine Falters also with us over at the White House. How you doing, Catherine?
Good, Amna. How are you?
I'm good. I am good. Let's start from good and work our way up from there. Rick, look, Sarah Sanders was on the back foot for sure today. It seems like 24 hours after the firing of Director Comey, we learn more details about how it happened. Now everyone's trying to fill in the when and the why. Did we learn anything new today from Sarah Sanders?
Well, she contradicted herself even on the contradictions. She said that they have been consistent. She also said that when she said yesterday that the president hadn't made up his mind until he got the recommendation from the Deputy Attorney General and the Attorney General, that she didn't have full information, that it wasn't until today that she talked to the president. The president gave an interview to NBC News earlier today where he said that he had made up his mind before he went into that meeting. So in the course of about 3 days now, this went from, this was Rod Rosenstein as Deputy Attorney General, this was his decision, to this contributed to the president's growing sense of concern, to the president made up his mind before he even looked at the information that he was presented by these top officials in the Justice Department. So that is quite an evolution that changes the picture of our understanding of the president's role in this, all of which is relevant because, to remind people, James Comey was heading up the investigation into his own campaign's contacts with the Russians.
And Rick, I just want to break this down a little bit in more detail because this why matters immensely, that the president was working either on the recommendation of people who know the agency and the inner workings and the details, or if he was acting upon his own impulses or reasoning and not in the best interests of the larger agency or country. So let's play some of these moments because I think having them play and reliving what was said really does strike how much the story has evolved. So first, let's start off with Sarah Sanders just this morning. We cannot underscore this enough. Just this morning in an interview on Good Morning America with George Stephanopoulos was asked about the timing, and this is what she had to say.
On Monday, they were at the White House for other meetings. The president asked them about their opinions on Comey. They told them, he asked for them to put that in writing, the conversation that they had orally there at the White House on Monday, asked them to put that in writing. They did that on Tuesday, but it wasn't directed, or the words that were written weren't at the direction necessarily of the president. Those were their own thoughts and ideas.
Right, those were the words, but hold on a second, because you said I was taking things out of context. I don't think I was doing that at all. On Tuesday night,
Sean like we weren't being truthful.
Sean Spicer,
I just want to be clear.
I need to clear this up. Sean Spicer said there was no involvement by the White House. It was all him, Mr. Rosenstein. You said absolutely this was something Rosenstein did on his own. Kellyanne Conway said the firing had everything to do with Rosenstein. And then the vice president even said Rosenstein came to work, sat down, and made the recommendation. He brought the recommendation to the president. But as your own timeline now states, the president was inclined to fire Mr. Comey after the hearings last week. He came to the White House on Monday morning. He asked to see Mr. Rosenstein, and he directed him to write this memo, didn't he?
He did not direct him to write the context of the memo. He asked him to put the comments that he had already made directly to the president in writing. Again, I think that you're trying to beat up the process, but the point here is that the findings in the letter, in the recommendation, were original thoughts by Mr. I think also having
so there we have
letter
George kind of
like
drilling down in that earlier contradiction of when the decision was made by the president to fire Director Comey. And guys, stay with me here. There's one more clip I want to play, and then we need to talk about this. Just a couple of hours ago, the president himself gave another version of events in an interview with NBC News. This is what he had to say.
Monday, you met with the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein.
Right.
Did you ask for a recommendation?
What I did is I was going to fire Comey. My decision. It was not.
You had made the decision before they came in the room.
I was going to fire Comey. There's no good time to do it, by the way.
Because in your letter you said I accepted their recommendation,
yeah, well,
so you had already made the decision.
I was going to fire regardless of recommendation.
So there was really
he made a recommendation. He's highly respected, very good guy, very smart guy. The Democrats like him, the Republicans like him. He made a recommendation, but regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey.
So, Rick, here's the thing. Look, this is within the space of a few hours of each other. These different versions were given. Why does this matter so much? I know people will say that we are harping on this timeline. We're trying to get to the bottom of the why. Why does it matter how the president decided and when he decided to fire his FBI director?
I think it's useful to go back and read Rod Rosenstein's letter because it talks about the Director Comey's conduct during the campaign. It doesn't mention the Russia investigation. It doesn't come that far. Only President Trump's cover letter, his firing letter, mentioned the fact that, according to him, he was assured by Comey 3 separate times that he was not being investigated on Russia. So it's because of the fact of this active investigation against Trump associates, Trump campaign officials, regarding their ties with the Russians, potential collusion with the Russians. That is important in understanding what James Comey was doing in real time that may have led to the time frame around President Trump. Because look, if it's just about what he did during the campaign, he could have been fired at any point. President Trump could have gone forward with that at any time. But what has people asking hard questions right now is that the knowledge, as reiterated just last week by Director Comey, this investigation is going on. The pace is quickening. More shoes are dropping almost every day in that investigation. And then he acts to fire and says the decision was his alone.
Catherine, I want to get your take on another part of this because the White House is sort of under assault when it comes to some of the information that they have been laying out since the firing of Director Comey. When it comes to Comey and the job that he was doing, the president has said again and again that he wasn't doing the job. I didn't believe he could do the job. He gave a few more reasons today, calling Comey a showboat and a grandstand. But we're hearing pushback on how Comey was seen in the agency from his colleagues, from the rank and file, from some other folks today.
Right on, that's right. And acting head of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, was on the Hill today, and he directly refuted what the White House was saying. He said that the rank and file of the FBI did not lose confidence in Comey. The White House said that they had. Sarah Sanders was asked about McCabe's comments today on Capitol Hill in the briefing just now, and she said that she's spoken to multiple people at the FBI. She's heard from multiple people who would disagree with that assessment, who say that the agency did lose confidence in Comey. So there's clearly a disconnect there. Sarah Sanders wouldn't say who exactly she's spoken to, but did say we're just going to have to agree to disagree on that.
And Rick, as always, a little bit of partisan politics makes its way into all of these conversations. We saw Sarah Sanders address this today in the briefing room. She's not wrong when she points to some of the contradictory statements that Democrats have been making about James Comey, right?
Yeah, and the question isn't, do Democrats agree that James Comey could have been fired, should have been fired, there was a reason to fire? The questions that have emerged are about the reasons for the firing and the time frame of the firing, and that's where you have even bipartisan questions being asked about how this has worked. And these shifting timelines are not helping the White House in any way. They have been a step behind the news on this because they have been contradicting themselves in terms of the information flow. And there's been a lot of reporting out there about Rod Rosenstein. We've been reporting, our Jonathan Karl reported earlier today that Rod Rosenstein was on the verge of threatening to quit over the way that this was being pinned on him. That is what led to some of the shifts and the scale back of the announcements of the timeline. And then finally, President Trump coming out today contradicting his own White House communications team and saying, no, this was my idea entirely. He's also contradicting, by the way, his own vice president, who was on Capitol Hill yesterday and multiple times said this was simply the president accepting the recommendations of the Deputy Attorney General and the Attorney General. And that is just simply not the case. The President of the United States is now the source on that, on the record saying it was his decision and his alone.
And Catherine, we're starting to learn a little bit more about Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein's name is now becoming a bit of a household name. I mean, after just a couple of weeks on the job, he's now under national spotlight and scrutiny. But he was on the Hill today, right? He was meeting with members of the Senate Intelligence. And this story is evolving very much in real time. But do we know anything about why people want to talk to him now?
You know, I'm sure everybody wants to hear from Rod Rosenstein. He's been on the job, as you mentioned, for 2 weeks. The White House has made him the central figure here, as Rick noted. When they came out just the other day, they were all pinning it on Rod Rosenstein. As Rick also notes, senior administration officials, Sean Spicer, the vice president himself, was perhaps misled here. So I think people do want to hear from Rod Rosenstein. what really happened, get his account of events here. I know our own Pierre Thomas was on the Hill today, and I think got a question to him. But yes, there's a lot of interest to hear from Rosenstein, especially given how this is unfolding, what really happened, how the president asked for their recommendation. Did he relay that he's actually already made this decision, Amna? So I think that's where we stand with him. Everybody does want to hear from him and get his timeline on this as well.
And Rick, there was a little point of contention there, back and forth between one particular reporter and Sarah Sanders in the briefing, but it gets to the larger issue of how we as journalists do our job with this administration and how the public can take some of the messaging coming from the White House. She was asked again and again various questions, and sometimes when it seems as if there's not an apparent answer, she says, I haven't had a chance to speak to the president about this. In light of conflicting reports, very different versions of the same story coming from members of the same administration, how do we know who to trust? Should we wait until we actually hear from the president himself to know what the real story is?
I don't think you have to even get to the motivations of the officials involved, where was anyone trying to be deceptive here. The fact is they didn't have a story straight internally. Increasingly, that looks like that's because the president had a story that was not a convenient one to tell immediately. I find it hard to believe that he wouldn't be telling his press staff about this. If he wanted that story out from the beginning, that it was his decision, then he certainly had ample opportunity to talk to them and to put that out starting on Tuesday night when this thing dropped. So a lot of this has to do with just the pace of things in the Trump White House, the fact that things kind of roll onto themselves, and he isn't afraid to create new chaos and a new distraction time and again. He didn't have a press operation that was fully staffed on this, but I think we're right to ask those questions about what exactly the word of a White House spokesperson means if it then can be contradicted directly by the president himself a few hours later.
Well, the briefing was certainly dominated by questions about Director Comey, about the Russia investigation, but there was another big piece of news we don't want to get lost in the headlines. Catherine Falders, you had an exclusive report this morning on something that they confirmed and announced in the briefing today. It's a new executive order. It's related to voter fraud. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so they launched a new executive order today related to voter fraud. It's called the Presidential Commission on Election Integrity. It's broader than just voter fraud, the White House says. It will also cover voter suppression. But as you know, this comes after the president has called for an investigation into his unsubstantiated claim that millions of people had voted illegally. Vice President Pence will chair this commission, and he'll be in charge with conducting this investigation or report. But we won't see that until 2018. So, yes, they will be looking into those claims that the president made after the election and continued to make, that millions of people voted illegally for Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And they'll be issuing that report in 2018. And it's important to note, they say that this is a bipartisan commission, but this really is the beginning stages of this. You have Vice President Mike Pence chairing it. You have the Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, who is a controversial figure in Kansas for his voting rights record. So you have those two people, and then you have other people who they say are being vetted. So Amna, it's important to understand this is just the beginning phases. He signed this executive order to establish the beginning phases into this investigation into voter fraud, but they still don't have the full committee there yet to investigate this.
And Rick, it is early, but there is clearly consensus that voter registration, the rolls, are a mess, right? So could this change, this executive order, whatever actions they end up taking, could this change the way that process goes in elections moving forward?
I view this as an exit ramp off a very inconvenient highway that the president put himself on when he declared without any evidence that he would have won the election if not for millions of illegal votes. They do not have that evidence. No one has credibly put forward evidence that would support that. And I don't expect that this commission is going to find something that every Secretary of State, save Chris Kobach in Kansas, has rejected as farcical and fanciful. I think that there are real issues about voter registration. There are real issues about voter access. There are real issues about voter ID at the ballot box. Those are all things that can be looked at, and maybe this does result in something. But in my sense of this, and talking to a couple of people who saw this coming in the last day or two, is that this is just an attempt to answer that phase, to close the book on that chapter that President Trump himself opened when he made that declaration about having rightfully won the popular vote.
Rick Klein in our D.C. Bureau. Catherine Falder is out at the White House. Thanks much, guys. Always good to talk to you.
Thank you, Amna.
Thanks, Amna.
And thanks to you for watching as well. That voter fraud and executive order report we just mentioned by Catherine Faulders is on the website. You can go to abcnews.com to read the full report. And of course, read a host of other stories that we have there updating in real time. Thanks for being with us. I'll see you back here soon. I'm Amna Nawaz.